Now we'll open the session for the question answers. यहाँ पे जितने भी लोग बैठे हैं अगर उनके कोई सवाल है तो वे सवाल पूछ सकते हैं.
My question is to you. Do you think that this break of trust and this echoes of this neoliberal world that we are living in do kill all the spontaneity and instinct of empathy towards the other? Or do we choose to be political or apolitical about certain subjects? For example, as a woman student, if there is a case of gender discrimination, I perceive it. Or construct it to be apolitical and say that I am not anti-right, left, up, down, but it is something I want to talk about. So, do you think that do we still hold on to certain vestige of a sense of belonging that is, in this anxiety that this neoliberal world has created and lay it on something that we can talk about in the sense of, to hold on to that last vestige of belongingness or identity or the complete killing of the spontaneity of it?
No, it's an extremely good question, but I would phrase it differently, and I see the process very differently, and that's where the complexity of today's indifference is that it is double-folded. There is a systemic indifference that people have, which is also anti-systemic. So in that sense, people are, since neoliberalism invisibilizes common people, invisibilizes their basic needs, right? The only way people are able to resist this process of top-down invisibilization is a bottom-up indifference. Therefore, today defections, buying up MLAs, dismissing, suspending MPs from parliament, these are not people's issues. There is a rampant indifference that people have towards these issues. And that's the crisis of liberalism, that's the crisis of liberal democracy. So the crux of this question we'll have to read is, why are people so indifferent to things that perhaps they would have responded 30, 40 years ago? Whether defections was a model issue at least at some point in time in Indian politics. Today it isn't. So I think there is something transformative about this indifference. So I see a double-foldedness in this indifference, that this indifference, which actually is potentially transformative, which is anti-systemic, ironically and very eerily, is also the bedrock of social indifference to fellow citizens. So that's the complexity of the populist authoritarian kind. That we don't have anything that is simple, which is linear, which can be paid off, and So that's why, while we are questioning, even as we question this indifference, its roots are somewhere else. So what do you do with that indifference when people have chosen indifference as a mode of protest? And the flip side of that indifference is also social indifference. Therefore, your indifference to suffering of the others. So indifference has become some kind of a new political subjectivity for people to resist. Now this is what Akhil Belgrami says, that when rules do not favor you any which way in a game of chess, the only way you can play the game is by upturning the board. There is no other way you can play the game of chess. That's what we are witnessing today. So I am not therefore pessimistic, I am not cynical, but there is a certain kind of a conceptual complexity that we are undergoing. That how do we approach this indifference, which is both source of people's resistance and also people's majoritarianism? I think they are embedded together. Most social scientists don't see this point because they are separating. There are no longer those kind of old binaries that we witness. So when you look at from the social indifference point of view, it's extremely frustrating. People are not responding to Palestine. People don't respond to mob lynching. People don't respond to corruption. People stop responding to opposition being bulldozed. But it's the same indifference which is also creating a response to a process of invisibilization which is stopped. So this is a question for your generation, that I think we are stuck with this, that either it's a bottleneck that we are stuck for a long time. If you are stuck with this kind of a process which is locked up, I think the only thing it can produce is a mass technocratic authoritarian state. But if this indifference can produce dynamics which can pull us in, because I do think it has the potential to pull us in a different direction. This indifference can also shake up ruling elites and capital. If that can potentially happen, I think we will see a different set of dynamics altogether.
Both of you, it was wonderful listening to you. My question is to Amit sir, is something that keeps coming up in our discussion is the unsustainability of the world order. By world order, I don't simply mean the Western-led, Turing-led, rules-based order. I mean nation state as an organized mode of living. I mean, we see the crisis of nation states in the form of terrorism, genocide, a crisis in Ukraine, or Israel-Palestine for that matter. I mean, the crisis of nation states manifests in the form of ethnic cleansing and genocide. So, in cultural and academic milieux such as ours, where we keep singing, as Spivak would say, keep singing the nation state, do we need to start thinking beyond the nation state as an organized nation?
Good evening, sir. Let me introduce myself. I'm Shaurya. For everyone, I introduced myself. Sir, my question to you is, it's an open question. Sir, are we sir, what do you think about the selective indifference we showed to the same kind of, let's say about Russia, Ukraine war, Russian invasion, that hasn't been condemned in the civil society in the same way that people are at least talking and supporting the Palestinians in the civil society at least. And so this is the first question. Sir, the second question is sir, do we lack solidarity like in the academic community also, when professors are being targeted in South Asian universities? There hasn't been support from the academic community for those professors only. Because do we fear, do we have our own self-interest which govern us from taking public positions which we otherwise preach in the classrooms? Thank you.
Sir, my question is for Dr. Amit. Sir, I'm a student of IR and security studies. Like you've touched upon, Gaza, Ukraine, and the unsustainable and the false dreams that the modern, world system or the nations sell to their citizens. But in that context, I would like to ask you how do we really see, like, I came here today to hear something different, because all I hear study is mostly how realism explains everything. So, what you spoke about Gaza or Ukraine, like, why nation states aren't really saying something is about, because they have their, they say that they legitimize their stand saying that we work in our national interest. And it's a realist way of looking at things. In that sense also, like, how do we really, change that discourse? It's very, tough to tackle that part. And other than that, one more thing, how you told about selling, we sell false dreams. So all nation states talk about development and growth. So it is a system that is so entrenched that anyone will play into it. It is very hard to tackle. So how do we kind of change that discourse on development, sustainability, and from a realist sense, so that it can really help the system to work?
एक सेकेंड.
For instance, if you try to understand the equation, you also have to understand that you can always apply conservatism. So neoliberalism is always accompanied by conservatism. They did not really interest. So I sometimes wonder, perhaps this is also a very creative kind of business, as you want about affect energy. And if you look at the writings of Apolitical, it's been argued that this is champion is a myth in one way or the other. Secular was also no champion in some way or the other, as non-secular has been. So do you think the time is right enough to sort of revisit the idea of community, which has been subdued in a certain kind of minority, and to sort of look for some kind of imminent critique within community, which can transcend a sectarian sort of logic that you always use? So what are the possibilities? I feel it's a creative time, so we need to be more creative to go beyond secular and modern theory, to bring sort of progressive frameworks within the community dynamics. Is there any possibility?
इसके बाद एक और राउंड कर लेंगे.
Okay, so writing your question over there, I'll try to plug these two questions. Yes, I mean, I initially thought I would talk about an impending new world order. I as usual, forgot to talk about it. I'm glad you raised it. I think what we are witnessing is the demise of a world order. We are also witnessing the birth of a new. Now, it's never an easy process. The one thing, a phrase that I used yesterday was that the present moment, it's a heavily pregnant present. What we are witnessing is an old order that is refusing to give birth to the new order that is waiting out to be born. Now, what we are about to witness in the next few 5, 6, 7 years, in my mind, I hope I'm wrong, but a fair amount of social dislocation. We are perhaps reliving the horrors of the 1930s all over again. It's scary to say that, but I think this is what we are. Now, our imagination has so completely been captured, ensnared, imprisoned, locked up by the idea of the nation state. It's preventing people from being able to think outside it, outside the received confines of the nation, especially in the social sciences. Now, I know the European Union project went completely wrong. It became a kind of a neoliberal project. But think about it. One of the most successful supranational projects arose because of the horrors of nationalism. The initial architects of the European Union understood that when you had contending nationalisms clashing with each other, you'd get something like the Second World War. Now, I think those lessons, the thing about us human beings is we forget our historical lessons very quickly. We have forgotten the fact that the nation state can be one of the most dangerous entities in the world. The inability of the social sciences to think beyond it is, I think, it represents a certain kind of a lack of intellectual capacity on the part of the social scientists. So I come to that point about realism and national interest. The only realist that I respect is a man called John Mearsheimer because he makes so much sense. The remarkable thing about realism is that it never will subject to any critical scrutiny what the national interest is. It's like God's gospel given, and people have to accept it. Now, that's the problem with international relations as a discipline. The problem with international relations as a discipline, and it's often political science, so I can say this. Sorry, I have people. You see, it sits in the lap of power. Okay? The social sciences are by necessity about speaking truth. And therefore, there's a problem with the discipline of international relations, specifically with realism. It has been in such close proximity to power, it has never been able to attain that critical distanciation that would allow it to unpack an idea like the national interest. And the same goes with the point about the nation state. What explains people's inability to think beyond? It's a historically contingent phenomenon. The nation state phenomenon around 250 years ago, we had empires, multinational empires. At some point, nation states will become obsolete. Now, how come people can't think beyond it? It makes me. Neoliberalism, I'll just make one point. The dominance of neoliberalism again reflects a certain kind of a lack of intellectual ability to think. But I can say only one thing about neoliberalism. That it's based, you said neoconservatism. A lot of it is based on neoclassical economics and neoclassical economics. It's premised on two assumptions: the perfectly rational actor, the perfectly competitive market. Nowhere in the world do these things exist, yet you find the dominance that neoliberalism has, and I think it's time that dominance is one of the question. It's easier said than done, but these are times in which imagination of a particular capacious kind of
To address Varun's question, that's a very, very important question for the times we're living in. But I would slightly shift the thrust the way you formulated it. It looks like you have a singular critique of modernity and that you are located in community. To read Zygmunt Bauman, I would suggest read his book on community, and he begins his first statement is that community is an fantasy. This whole idea, it gives a sense that you are sitting next to a cozy fireplace with no power relations and with some kind of an ethnic bonding. They don't exist anywhere. If you watch the movie Animal, that is only ethnic relations you have, right? So one community of that kind is a fantasy. You need critique of modernity on the other hand. Now this is also very Gandhian, the kind of question you have raised. Again, so just read Bill Graham's wonderful piece on, though I differ with this point. I mean, we have been engaging on email, back and forth. Very because Gandhi is suggesting the idea that you suggested, that instead of going through liberal, modern means of bringing equality, you should fight hierarchies from within in the community. But what would that look like? And there is no sense, because those resources within community sufficient to fight the new emergent global capital? That's the key question. That most post-colonial scholars don't peg community to capital. They actually see community as an alternative to capital, but capital has enough power to subsume community within it. So to imagine that there are these vernacular, given local, untouched resources, which is very nostalgic, and all nostalgia leads only to fascism, nothing else. So I think we should avoid this nostalgia, avoid singular, overburdened critique of modernity, which is again, I think, in Indian context, a very, very caste-Hindu location. Ambedkar was high modernist. Ambedkar was not communitarian. Why? Neo-Kantians are communitarians. I mean, these are big questions of our time. So the post-colonial scholars again are very uncomfortable with Ambedkar. So I feel all eulogization of community in Indian context is a very caste-Hindu romanticism. No subaltern would eulogize community, no subaltern would eulogize village republics. Gandhi eulogized village because he never saw a village in his lifetime. And Ambedkar, who came from a rural group, was bitterly critical of village and said bent on ignorance and isolation. So Varun, I would suggest that we need to have a double-edged critique. That yes, community, one has to look at what is it, but to look at community as an alternative to modernity, I don't think it is it. Well, that's the whole question that, the question of indifference, that all this bonding is sectarian. That's the whole problem. And secularism talks about cosmopolitanism, which is not rooted. So the point you are making in terms of rooted cosmopolitanism, the idea people, global scholars are toying, but how does that emerge? Social capital, we had a lot of literature doing that. So we really do not know how to have the idea of solidarity which is not sectarian, or the idea of solidarity which is not does not descend into patronage. So that's the real epistemic crisis of our time, that if we can push in that direction, if we can get truth. And my idea would be that it's only the mutated process one has to imagine, not some kind of an original position of community or this kind of an over-exaggerated critique of modernity. Both are dangerous. One has to have critique of modernity because the scale of violence has gone up, no doubt, when one can have that critique. But we should not forget that the idea of calling that violence is itself a modernistic. So the modernity is not a closed data. It's an open, it's multiplicity, it's porous, and multiple. Modernity is dangerous space. It has violence, but it has the capacity to also call it violence.
बोल दो ना सेकंड लास्ट राउंड होगा 2 क्वेश्चन.
Hello.
Your question that he missed, but you answered
The second part.
the academic
Yes, yes.
Well, what to talk about my colleagues, so I have to be civil. One should ideally resist, and good news I should give you because you refer to South Asia, the suspension has been revoked yesterday, so there is something to celebrate. But yes, why that those kinds of solidarities are broken down is a question. So because of community links, I will refrain from commenting on that. On my community.
We will finish with this last round of questions because वहाँ पे दूसरा भी question है. We finish with this.
Professor, thanks for your talk. My question is more related to political psychology part. So, whenever I think of this political aspect from left, right, center, I always come back to the idea that different people see the world in different ways. I always see people believing in that their religion or their tradition is important. There are people who believe that nation or nation state or country is important. And then there are people who are sort of non-religious, moderate and all. And I don't know how to bring them together, how to convince one side that, suppose one side, like religious side, that religion is not that important, religious solidarity is not that important. So my question is that whenever you talk about this alternative picture, this changing discourse, how do you how do you address this question that for different people, different values are there, like in terms of religion and this? How do you see this? Thank you.
Next.
My
Keep the
question
questions short.
To both of you, anyone of you can answer this. So my question is basically to the terms political and apolitical. How essential is it to the term political to differentiate or different or to mark itself out from something called apolitical, or how contingent it is for this differentiation on a particular country or time, say 1970?
इसके बाद भी दोनों प्रोफेसर यही हैं, तो आप सवाल उनसे पूछिएगा.
ये लास्ट क्वेश्चन
एक वहाँ पे भी है एक्चुअली सर एक्चुअली
लास्ट
So I have two questions. The first one is to Professor Guravaji. When you talk about the indifference, what do you think is the role of emotion in political theorization? Because when we theorize politics, there is hardly any space for emotions, and therefore it leads to a disconnect between the civil society movement and the theorization. The second question is to Professor Amirali. So when we talk about critiquing and going beyond the nation state, what do you exactly critique? I have tried to critique the idea of the nation itself, a nation which has a homogeneous self by looking at the histories provided by Martin Bernal or Hoskote Trojanov or Graeber and Benro. How there was no essentially pure homogeneous culture, all cultures are all culture, no confluence, no culture. So how do you, if you critique the idea of the nation in this way, then how do you go forward? How do you imagine something which goes beyond this idea? Thank you.
So this last point about critiquing the nation state, I mean, the circumstances provide ample opportunities. The climate crisis, it doesn't respect the boundaries of nation states, and the climate crisis is going to give rise to biblical level mass migrations. No nation state will be able to prevent people from coming across the borders. So I think the circumstances that we are about to witness will themselves provide the ground for the obsolescence of the nation state. And people have predicted the obsolescence of the nation state for a long time. People said financial flows will undermine and so on. But I think in terms of the way the 21st century will unfold, especially with the climate crisis and the waves of migration that are inevitable, the very idea of the nation state is an absurdity. I mean, the pandemic was an example of it. Famously, Pope Francis said that narrow the walls of Cyprus will not keep out the pandemic. And we had this absolutely perverse response. People were on borders being bolstered and all of that. So I think the current circumstances provide the possibility of critiquing the nation state in a way that has not been available so far. So that answers the question.
So, Pankaj, your question on incommensurabilities, you should look at David Goulard's book, Road to Somewhere. In fact, it says that the agenda of economic inequality today has been replaced by this global divide between somewheres and anywheres. But anywheres are the small elite cosmopolitans like us who have no affinities, like Amir, no affinity, wants to go beyond nation state. But the bulk is about somewheres. They are located. He says that 65% of Britain is still provincial. They have not. They have not gone. I mean, look at Scotland. I mean, this is all. Mumbai is all in metros. I mean, look at. Not to speak of United States. United States only place livable is New York. You go anywhere beyond New York, the crudity hits you right in your face, right? So the point is, the world is provincial, and you have this small cosmopolitan elite, which are anyway, which are like us, comfortable to travel, English speaking, all that. So that incommensurability has emerged, and this is the overreach of the cosmopolitans, which has led to this backlash of the somewheres, which is what is the populist, right-wing populism all about. So that commensurability exists in world, which does not say that the somewheres do not carry their own set of prejudice. That's where community exists. Community comes with bonding and prejudice. Cosmopolitan loosens up, but it also loosens up bonding. So what do you do? And that's what is linked to question of emotions. That I don't think now people have, entire new literature is all about emotions. There's a lot of new literature that has come in terms of emotion studies. People have gone back to this dimension of affect, People have gone back to scholars, cultural sociology, you should read. They talk of inner environments, that especially post-Freud, now we cannot think of only in terms of rationality. That irrational drives also capture and they have their own legitimate space. So emotions is back in a very big way, but I would suggest that emotions have to also be studied necessarily in terms of link with the everyday ethics and lay normativity. Otherwise, emotions become purely experiential, but emotions also evaluative in content, and democracy is linked to an evaluative process. So one should not simply displace in this exuberance to bring no emotions. It doesn't mean that we get into only experiential language. That creates its own kind of ominous political possibility.